everyone, I'm Denisha Devnarayan, and you're watching the Full Quota podcast on One World Sports Radio.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Full Quota podcast. My name is Mpho and Tim. I'm joined by Tim here with us as we normally do. He is the co-host of the Full Quota podcast. And so that's what we do. We discuss all things cricket in South Africa, all things Proteas. And so that's essentially what we're going to be talking about today. We'll be doing a preview, a podcast of the South Africa versus West Indies game, the second game in Group 1. South Africa lost to Australia. You could say narrowly or not, depending on how you see that game. But the West Indies also lost, but that was a much more important loss. We've got Nikhil ready to discuss with us all about that and also look forward into that game to give you some insights and things to watch out for, because that's what we do. We give you insights. We know, like, over 5, if this happens, you know whether South Africa's doing well or not. That's who we are. But Tim, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing good. Strangely optimistic about tomorrow's game. I don't know whether that was because of what England did to the West Indies, but yeah. So, looking forward to tomorrow's game.
We're gonna get into all of that, but let's get Nikhil on. We have Nikhil Chandani, all the way from Barbados, who's a commentator, cricket commentator in the West Indies, to talk about the West Indian team. Nikhil, how are you doing?
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for having me on, as usual. Yeah, really good. Obviously, disappointing result from a West Indies perspective, but I think, South Africa is a team that we've got a decent record against. They narrowly got away when they came to the Caribbean earlier in the year. So I'm sure the big guys will step up when it matters most tomorrow morning. For me, morning, but obviously tomorrow evening for Dubai time.
So thank you very much. Before we carry on, remember to subscribe and like on all our platforms. We're currently live on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter. We're going to be carrying the game live tomorrow, live watch-along commentary. We have our usual radio commentary on onewsr.com, so do watch out for that. If you want to know more, just hit the notification bell and you'll get it going. Nikhil, to start off with, when I looked at that result on Saturday again for the West Indies, the only thing that kind of hurt me was that there's going to be a backlash. There's going to be some sort of a revenge, a retaliation. What's the feeling in the West Indies around that game? And do they expect the team to come back out tomorrow and just take South Africa to the sword? Well,
I think obviously it's pretty shocking. If I'm being honest, 55. Yes, you can say win or lose, but no one expected 55 all out. So for that reason, I would say initially the reaction was, extremely, shocked, some embarrassed even because of the mode of defeat. What I will say, though, is over the last couple of days, I think the feeling around the Caribbean is sort of improved in the sense that I think people are more optimistic at the fact that, these guys are perennial champions. They've won it 2 times, the West Indies world champions. And everyone in this World Cup will have that bad game. So whether that was the West Indies' version of the bad game, yes, we struggled in the 2 warm-up games, but I really don't see us replicating another performance like that. So I think generally now people are pretty happy that they've got that out of the way, sort of seen what's worked and what hasn't in terms of the batting lineup. And I think now they will be able to make an adjustment going forward to the very important now game against South Africa, which to me is almost like an eliminator, because for a team to go 0-2, it's very hard from that stage to then make it. You depend on other teams and other results.
Tim, question on South Africa before we get you get to. From a South African perspective, as Nikhil said, it's an eliminator for West Indies. For South Africa, essentially, it's the same thing. If you don't win, it'll be very hard for you to make it through that group. How are you looking at this game or looking at the West Indies in the context of the 2 losses, well, South Africa and also that one for the West Indies?
Yeah, as you say, it's pretty much a win at all costs fixture. I'm as I said earlier, I'm quietly optimistic from a South African perspective going into this game. as bad as our batting performance was in terms of batting, it can only get better. It can only improve, and I do think that there's going to be some sort of fight back, particularly from the batters. I think one of our guys is going to come off in this fixture. It just needs a Quota or somebody like that to come off.
Yeah. Tim, before I cut you off, you had a question to ask Nikhil, so I
was just going to ask, just going into tomorrow's game in the manner of the loss, it was quite difficult to see the positives, but I did see positives, particularly with the bowling, in terms of the intensity. You went out and you made sure they got as many wickets as possible to put pressure on the English. Do you think the West Indies will make any changes going into this game, either with the batting in particular? Do you think there'll be any changes?
Yeah, I think it's a question that many people have discussed, Tim. The bowling, just on your point, I thought it was fantastic. Young Akil Hossain coming into the fore, in as sort of a replacement player. I didn't expect him to start either, but I just think the impact that he was able to make, with the ball, very attacking the stumps with the use of the arm ball, etc. It was just brilliant to watch. But in terms of changes, one for me, I think is very important. Roston Chase, someone who I thought would have started the World Cup based on that stabilizer role, which I think the West Indies pivotally need. And I think if there were any doubts or inclinations that they didn't need him, well, I think here we go. And especially the fact is that this Dubai surface is gripping. We saw Adil Rashid, Akil Hossain, even in your game, Keshav Maharaj, well, that was in Abu Dhabi, but I'm just saying he will have a part to play as well on this Dubai surface. So I think with his off spin, Roston Chase comes in, can give you those 2 overs, but also bats at number 3 and allows sort of someone to just anchor the innings. Because I hear many people say, T20 cricket, you don't need that stabilizer, you don't need that anchor. But I think for the West Indies team, really it fits the balance and fits the mold if they are able to have that stabilizer. So then the Russells, the Pollards, the Gales can then go after him. So personally, I would be bringing in Chase for the next game, and I think it depends on how he goes, especially on pitches like Sharjah and Dubai, which are gripping. I think his off spin will be a massive asset as well.
Yeah. In that scenario, who sits out for Roston Chase coming in?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Many people have called Chris Gayle. I think it's either 2 guys, Lendl Simmons at the top of the order, whether Gayle goes to open the batting, which we haven't seen this year for the West Indies in T20 cricket, or it's just a straight swap for Gayle. But I think one of them have to make way, simply because you have 2 guys going. You have really, with Gayle and Simmons, guys looking to sort of bat through the power play. But I think if you bring in Chase, you get that role, and then you can ask someone like a Gayle or a Simmons, whoever you choose at the top of the order, to continue to go after the bowling and free up a bit, because you have that protection and stability coming with Roston Chase. So I think either one of those guys will have to make way, but I just think it's so important that we get Roston Chase in the lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think...
Yes, go on, Paul. Go.
No,
Just on that, what is your opinion on the Gale selection before the tournament? Do you think he was the right choice? Do you think the experience of his experience, or do you think they missed the trick not going for somebody a bit younger in the actual squad?
Well, I think all year, Tim, they sort of, had Gayle outlined and identified as someone that they wanted in the squad. Hence, giving him the games in international cricket early on. And whilst he didn't have, the best of years, went to the IPL, only played the 2 games in the UAE and then left for, mental health reasons. I think based on his experience and what he's been able to achieve at the World Cup level on the world stage, sure, tell me if you invest in him throughout the year and he's playing international cricket for you, then I could see justifying the selection. What I will say, though, is if he does struggle, I don't think there should be any hesitation to sort of replace him with someone like a Roston Chase, because there's plenty of replacements in this West Indies team. We've got depth, and this World T20 is not somewhere you can experiment. If you lose 2 games, you're almost virtually out of the tournament. So I think this next game is crucial. Yes, Gill, he's been a resident performer over the years, but there should not be any hesitation if the selectors do decide, Gill is not really fitting the mold because he has struggled on these UAE surfaces. I think he's struck at just over 100 and averaged under 15. So he hasn't been excellent like we're used to seeing him in the T20 game. I saw him in the warm-up games as well. He got 20 from 30 deliveries against Pakistan. Didn't feature with the bat much against Afghanistan. So clearly, these surfaces are tough for Gill to bat on. And I think with the pace of Nortje, Rabada, and then you've got spin of Maharaj, Shamsi, etc. I think it will be quite tough for him. So I could definitely see, someone like a Roston Chase sliding in for Gill. But all in all, I wouldn't say, it's a bad decision because they backed him through the year in T20 cricket. And obviously, he's got the experience and the know-how on winning tournaments.
Yeah. So with regards to the West Indies team, there are a couple of guys who haven't faced South Africa, who didn't face South Africa in that series. One of them was Akil Hussain. He was in the squad, but he didn't get game time. And then obviously Fabian Allen's out, but that's who Akil was replacing. The other one is Ravi Rampal. South Africa obviously has faced Ravi Rampal before, but not this group. Can you give us a flavor of the rise of both? And on top of that, what they bring to that West Indian attack?
Yeah, I think obviously, Akil Hussain, I think he impressed himself, in that first game in the World Cup because to come on a big stage, under pressure, probably would have been saying to himself, he has to do well here because there will be questions asked about his selection. I thought Hayden Walsh Jr. would have been the one that sort of got the nod, but the West Indies opted to sort of keep that mold of that left arm spinner when they were so effective with Fabian Allen in the squad. So I think it sort of benefits the West Indies the fact that he didn't play in that South Africa series because they don't have any way to plan against him. They wouldn't have faced many of his deliveries, Hussain. So all in all, I think he will be sort of a lock. And why I think he's so important, one of the questions I had going into this World Cup, guys, was the West Indies bowling in the power play. I was really worried without the likes of Jason Holder and Sheldon Cottrell, the new ball bowling. But I think if Akil Hussain gives you 2 overs in that power play, it just helps you get out of it, pretty much unscathed. If he can take a couple of wickets as he did in the last game as well. He's so good at bowling the new ball and he bowls those arm deliveries as well, which can really throw off the batsman. So I think Hussain, he will provide pretty much a challenge on this Dubai track to South Africa. Ravi Rampal now is someone that I, in my personal opinion, wouldn't have started. I would have gone with O'Shane Thomas on this, which is supposed to be the fastest surface. But the way I saw it play in the first game, I was pretty impressed with Rampal. I think 36 years old, tons of experience would have played at the last World T20 where the West Indies won. But what I love about him is, the slower deliveries, the difference in variations and pace. And I think that is something that can catch out the South Africans. I mean, they'll be pretty experienced, be playing. A lot of these guys would have played him at the last World Cup, but they are, as you said, some that have not faced him. So he could sort of throw them off. Obed McCoy is another one that they wouldn't have faced. And yes, they would have faced him in this series, but not before that. So I am pretty optimistic about the West Indies bowling chances.
That's really good. That's really good to hear.
I was certainly very impressed with Rampal in the CPL. And I'd heard good things, and he was really, really, bowled outstandingly. Just on the changes, and I'm just thinking there what happened to South Africa in the game against Australia. As soon as they brought on Zampa, South Africa just completely became shotless, which is what I thought that would happen. You don't think the West Indies might be persuaded to go in with an extra spinner? Because we know that the West Indies bat long anyway. We know they can bat number 9. They've got a lot of batsmen. You don't think because South Africa struggle against the spin, they might be persuaded to go with Hussain and Walsh?
I think it's a viable option, based on they will assess the surface and sort of see where, if it's going to be conducive to seam or spin. But there's always the option of, dropping someone like a Ravi Rampal and bringing in Walsh because of the fact that you have Andrew Russell who can both seam. Kyron Pollard as well. Bowling was very underrated, averaged 19 in the IPL for the Mumbai Indians in the UAE on these tracks. So you've got Russell, you've got Pollard there who can give you those 4 or 5 overs between them. So there's always that option to go for the extra pace. Whether they do it or not is going to be tricky. Walsh would have obviously had his opportunity to play against South Africa early in the year and would have done well as well. So I think he can come in as an option. The extra spinner I would go with is Roston Chase because obviously he boasts that batting lineup. And I just think probably more so for the batting reasons, I think he needs to come in. So you get the extra spinner there. But definitely, Tim, it's a way that they can go. I just don't know if Abu Dhabi is sort of Dubai. It's usually a very quick surface. It's supposed to be the quickest in the UAE. I'm not sure which square specifically they're going to be playing on, whether it's the same one that they used in the last game. But if it is, well, then there's definitely that option because you saw Adil Rashid and as you said, Zampa, how dangerous Rashid was on that surface to the West Indians. They had no answers for him.
Yeah. Speaking of spin, a lot of the context around that West Indies series when South Africa were in the Caribbean was around the West Indies' ability to play spin. And a lot of the conversation in South Africa is play the extra spinner. These guys don't know how to play spin. Looking at that batting lineup, the one thing that I've noticed even up until now, even throughout that series, was those batsmen in that middle order don't have form yet. And you're kind of relying on one of the big hitters, either Hetmeyer, Russell, Pollard, to come through. How have the West Indies looked to address that spin? Was it a fallacy, or just what do you think about how they can? Because South Africa's coming with 8 overs of spin, that we can tell you, but there could be 2 more in Aiden Markram. Is that a weakness of the West Indies side?
Oh, I think it has to be because when you look at the calendar year in T20 international cricket, that South Africa series, of course, they struggled to spin. But not only that, Sri Lanka as well. They were very close to losing that Sri Lanka series because of Wanindu Hasaranga and Akila Dhananjaya and what they were able to do against the West Indians. So I think it is an area which has been looked at throughout the year. They've tried different things. Jason Holder went up the order in some games. But I think the 2 best players to spin in the team is Roston Chase and Shimron Hetmeyer. Those 2, for me, hold the key once Chase gets the nod. And I think that's why you could possibly see him in the 11 because of the fact that, they need to neutralize the spin. Because I do think with the left-handers in the West Indies, Aiden Markram will, have a massive part to play with the ball in hand, especially the way that this Dubai surface has gripped. So when you've got Shamsi, Maharaj, and then you've got Markram who can potentially give you 4. Because remember, Moeen Ali was only supposed to bowl 2 overs up front. He ended up bowling 4 straight in the power play and was really effective. So that could be a definite option. And I think the West Indies have to be very careful because if they come and allow someone like Aiden Markram to slip in 3 or 4 overs, just at around 6 or 7, it does sort of peg you back because remember, you've got overs from Rabada, from Nortje, from Maharaj, from Shamsi to navigate. So you've got to pick a couple of those bowlers to go after. There's a long batting lineup. I've said it before. The West Indies can afford to risk their hand in the power play because of how deep they bat. But at the same time, they have to be a bit more sensible than, 55 all out.
Dude. As South Africans, we know that our strengths are bowling. We know that we're going to win this sort of game. It's going to come from our bowlers more from our batters. What do you think West Indies will be looking to do if they win the toss tomorrow? Are they looking to have battle ball first?
Well, it's tough. Obviously, the pitch conditions, will have a massive part to play on that. But based, I would think, on how they fared, in that first game against England, maybe we could see them bowl first because I think, obviously, they've got a very strong batting lineup. The likes of Russell, Pollard, all these guys are very good chasers. We see them in T20 cricket. They're really stalwarts of the game. And the West Indies, because of that deep batting lineup, they may fancy themselves to chase. But this Dubai track is a really tricky one because I find sometimes, you get a surface where the ball really comes onto the bat and you can see the likes of Rabada and Nortje because in the IPL in the last 13 matches, 105 wickets were taken by seamers at Dubai as opposed to 40 by the spinners. So clearly there was, a massive favoring to the pace. But that being said, we saw India and Pakistan on the surface yesterday, how great Shaheen Shah Afridi was. So when you really have to compare the two to then sort of how Adil Rashid bowled on the track, even though I thought it was, not the greatest of batting displays from the West Indies, I think either way, the West Indies will have to get a win. Whether they bowl first or bat first, they've got the requisite, needs necessary to do either one. But definitely a lot will depend on the surface. But you could see them even bat themselves and bat first yet again.
Speaking about winning, how do you put South Africa under pressure and what is that game plan for the West Indies tomorrow?
What I think is to expose the batting order, and that's by taking early wickets. Aidan Markram has been fantastic, even in the IPL. He came now against Australia, got another score. But what worries me the most is Quinton de Kock, because I think Quinton de Kock is such a fantastic player, man. I mean, I've watched him for so many years. He's just a generational talent. And guys I speak to from South Africa, they say that he's probably the most talented first-class cricketers from South Africa. They tell me all the time he's the most talented or skilled player they've ever seen come out of South Africa. So I think, it's only a matter of time before he gets runs. And I think it could be very soon. And I'm praying it's not against the West Indies, because the Kock is a type of man, as we've seen in the IPL and in T20 cricket. If he gets going, it's not going to be a small score. He'll get an 80 and take the game completely away from you. So I think that those power play overs are very crucial. The West Indies did well against Bavuma when he came to the Caribbean. So if they can take Bavuma and the Kock 2 to 3 wickets inside the power play in the UAE, I think power plays have shown how important they are. The team that wins the power play goes on to win the game, 80% or more of the time. So the West Indies target that power play is tough, because they've struggled in the power play, especially with the bowling, and as we've seen in the batting in the last game. But that, for me, expose the batting order and ask those guys coming lower down to come and play big innings for you.
I think for
I was just gonna say I agree. When we lose early, we struggle between over 6 to 13 in that middle period. That's where we struggle. If we 3 down, we do tend to struggle.
Yes. I think from my end, the way South Africa needs to try and necessarily give the West Indies a game plan, and you can tell me whether I'm correct or not, is win the toss, put them into bat. It's the one time in this tournament I would be comfortable chasing, because you want to see if the demons from Saturday continue. And on top of that, obviously, with the bit, because I think South Africa have a better bowling attack than the West Indies, and I think you want to lead with your strength. And I think that's where South Africa might just want to try win the game against the West Indies. Against any other team, win the toss, bat first, because I think there's comfort in putting something on the board and letting the bowlers win you the game on the back end. So for me, that's essentially where I'm looking at. And with the West Indies, it's because obviously you're speaking about losing wickets in the power play. For me, I need to have the West Indies 4 down in the power play for me to feel any comfort. Whereas normally I'd say if you lose 3 wickets in the power play, you shouldn't win the game. And we saw that with South Africa. Australia only lost 2 wickets in the power play, whereas South Africa lost 3, and that's essentially how that game went. But the other thing is boundary denial, and the size of the boundaries in Dubai is a key factor here, Nikhil, especially the way, because the boundaries when we played in the Caribbean weren't that large. And West Indies won the boundary battle, but somehow South Africa won the series, which is something that's quite the importance of having somebody in the team to rotate the strike. I know you spoke about Roston Chase, but I don't see Roston as a strike rotator, even though they speak of the anchor role. Where is that? Because we saw even in yesterday's game, the team that ran the most singles actually won the game, which is contrary to T20. Where does that come in? Is Nicholas Pooran the guy? What's the game plan around that, or is it just we're going to try and beat you one way and there's no plan B?
No, I think that has to be sort of a game plan. It has to be for the West Indies to sort of win this game. They've got to run hard between the wickets, and it's something that we didn't see in the first game. But I just think you can't sort of just stick to one way in this tournament, especially as you said, Dubai, big boundaries. I think Pooran, Hetmeyer, those guys run really well between the wickets. Evan Lewis is very quick between the wickets as well. So if they can start, yes, with Gale, it's pretty tough. But if they do go with Simmons and Lewis at the top, then those two, should be looking to run those quick singles, because I think that is a main area where the West Indies have fallen down in T20 cricket this year. The fact that they haven't been able to sort of pick up those singles. Yes, there are those tough phases of the game, but in those tough phases, they don't have to be 5-dot balls and a 4. It can be a boundary, but a couple 2s in the over, etc. It changes the over from going from 4 to 8 or 9, and in the end, it all adds up. It sort of makes a huge difference towards the end. So I think the boundary percentage from the West Indies, yes, they always aim to go for the boundaries and go for those big hits. But on a venue like Dubai, they've got to find a way to run singles, get the ball in the gaps, and run hard.
I've got some questions on Twitter from one of our friends, the cricket connoisseur. I'm sure you know him. He's asking, I'm sure jokingly, to talk about the last game in detail, please, because England. We've also got a West Indies, one of our friends on our platform, Ravi. He's a West Indies supporter. He says, listen to Uncle Ravi. Windies will beat South Africa tomorrow. Elderly team they may be, but they are world beaters. So I want to ask you a question on that. And then Cricket Connoisseur asks, what's your favorite first innings wicket? The last game got 10 of them to choose from. Aaron, we're not getting there anytime soon. But one question from me, last question. Who is the guy from the West Indies tomorrow that you need to win this game? He needs to come through. He needs to do his job. Who's the game winner tomorrow for the West Indies?
If I had to pick one, I think I want it to be Shimron Hetmyer, because I think Hetmyer is a fantastic player. And that IPL for me, where he, was the highest striker at 168 in the tournament, average 34. He batted at 5 and 6. Now he's got a different role where he's coming much earlier for the West Indies, batting at 3 and 4. But guess what? Hetmyer plays for Delhi, and so does Rabada and Nortje. So he has a good understanding of what they bowl and probably knows them like the back of his hand. I would have faced plenty of them in the nets, as well as his, great ability to play spin. So I think for me, if Hetmyer can get away, you just need someone to put their hand up and get a half century for the West Indies. When someone can bat through the innings and not necessarily bat slowly, if they can just, if Hetmyer plays his, natural game, plays freely and expresses himself, gets to a 40 or 50, suddenly the rest, you'll see guys around sort of build partnerships. Build that momentum. I think the confidence will be low based on the fact that in the last 3 games, including the 2 warm-up games, the West Indies batting lineup, they haven't been able to really get anything together. The only time was when Roston Chase got a 50 against Afghanistan, but even then, not a substantial score by any means. So I just think someone needs to put their hand up. I think the start will be tentative, but if you do see someone like a Hetmyer get away, then you could see fireworks, and that's what we all want to see.
Mzansi Comic Club says he thinks Ravi Rumpel's going to be the player to watch tomorrow, which, yeah, I understand. Ravi, I get it, Ravi. Tim, your last question?
No, I'm just going to agree there with Nicole. Hetmyer is a world-class player, but I've always felt for the last couple of years he's just needed somebody to bat with. For far too long, he's been needed to score 10s, 11s, 12 and over because he's run out of partners. He actually needs, as you say, a Roston Chase just so he can calm the situation and Hetmyer can bide his time, if you like, because you need to bide your time even in this format. Just finally, from my end, we had an Australian journalist for the Australian game, and she was telling us how everybody in Australia's focus was all about the Ashes. There were a large section of Australians who didn't even know that there was a World Cup going on. I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but is that the case in the West Indies?
Oh, no, man. Come on. We're 2-time champions, so the World T20 is something that everybody's looked forward to. And, I mean, that start has definitely taken the wind out of many people's sails. But what I will say is good thing it was only the first game, because this World Cup, I think that's probably added to the West Indies as well. They're under pressure based on the fact that they've won 2 already. And sort of the expectation is, they built the entire year towards this World T20. But what I will say is I've been pleasantly surprised by the quality of, the qualifiers leading into this. I don't think it'll be easy by any means for any team, to beat anyone. Because I look at someone like a Sri Lanka and a Bangladesh. If they turn up, they've got some guys on these surfaces that can really be dangerous, which sort of play like, those Asian subcontinent surfaces that those 2 teams will be used to. And then in Namibia, you never count them out. Scotland, all these guys can just show up anytime, and really beat those big nations. So I don't even think it'll be a case of upsets. I think it's just more, you have to go out and play every single game hard. So I think this will be a very, very challenging World T20 for the West Indies to win. But that's the expectation in the Caribbean. Definitely a big deal. And no, everybody knows that the World T20 is going on.
Well, Dwayne Bravo released a song that told the world that you are world champions. I just hope that it doesn't. It lasts a little bit longer than the month that it was released in. Nikhil, do you have any questions for us from a South African perspective regarding tomorrow's game?
I think probably the main question I would have is sort of where do you guys see, this South African batting lineup, which I know has been like sort of a weak area because the bowling attack may have been maybe one of the best in the tournament. How do they get it together? I'm sure Quinton de Kock sort of holds the key to that, but that middle, something about it, yes, Heinrich Klaassen, he's extremely good, but David Miller, very experienced, but something when they lose those early wickets, they just can't seem to gain that momentum to close out the innings.
Tim, do you want to have at it or must I?
No, I was just going to say you hit it spot on. For me, it's a bit of non-selection in the right places. It's people batting in wrong positions. It's not so much bad personnel, because I think that 11 against Australia is our best 11. I don't think there should be no real debate about that. That is our best 11. But, for example, Miller needs to come in instead of above Klaassen. Miller is the individual that can bat for 9, 10, 11 overs if we lose early wickets. Klaassen is the finisher. He's supposed to be the guy that comes in and hits 30 off 10 balls. He's not the guy that's going to bat for 10 or 11 overs. So I think that there is part of the problem, is where we put the people. Where do you put somebody like Rossi? I think Rossi is best at 3. Sometimes we've seen Markham at 3 and Rossi at 4. So it's at 3, 4, and 5. That is the problem, and where they have batted themselves. But for me, it would be Rossi 3, Markham 4, Miller 5. That would be my middle order.
Yeah, and I think Nikhil and Tim, but Tim largely. When I look at the game tomorrow, I'm not making any changes to the 11 because to a certain extent we don't bat deep like the West Indies, so we bat until 6, and I think we actually bat until 7. It's just that our number 7 hasn't had a lot of game time. That's Dwayne Pretorius, and Dwayne's very good on these wickets. He bowls a lot of cutters. He was bowling a lot of slower balls. He did quite well, even though in that last over he couldn't defend it. But I don't think anybody would have defended 8 off that last over. My thing with the batting is that you kind of need Temba and Quinny to get that relationship they had early in 2020, where they would have these massive 70-run, close to 100-run partnerships against England and against Australia, where they got the momentum of the innings going. What's lacked on Saturday was that momentum. It never was there. And to a certain extent, you've got 4 openers, essentially, in Rassie, Aiden, Temba, and Quinny. So if you do lose 2 wickets, the other 2 need to try and carry the team for as long as possible. Because what the game plan this team has always showed us throughout the year is if one of your top 5 or top 5 is batting in over 15, you can then look to accelerate from then on. Whereas the West Indies' game plan is acceleration all the way through the innings to some massive crescendo. Whereas South Africa's like, look, yes, we're losing 20, 30 runs because we don't have those power hitters. But if we get ourselves to over 15 and some of our top 4 are in, we can score a big run. And you saw that with Pakistan, where Rassie van der Dussen managed to get, I think, with David Miller and Heinrich Klaassen to a certain extent, managed to get 72 runs in those last 6 overs against Pakistan, 5 overs against Pakistan. And that was largely the game plan. It's take it as deep as possible, and then you can assess from there, which is counterintuitive to T20 because you have a team filled with guys who don't hit a lot of boundaries but have to rotate the strike, and that's where it wasn't there. Was that strike rotation? It's kind of like they wanted to play a game that was against them, and Quinton de Kock's very important to us, and I think South Africa don't win many games if Quinton de Kock goes out very early, and so for me, that's the key to the West Indies: get him out early. But obviously, what we saw on Saturday was something that bothered me a lot because it kind of reminded me that actually this team has a flaw, and it's much lower than the 140, 150 you saw in the Caribbean. And if it becomes that, then you find yourself in a little bit of trouble. But tomorrow, I honestly do think it'll be 160, round about there. if South Africa bat first. And it's going to be up to it effectively goes down to which of the West Indies stars or that middle order comes out. In the Caribbean, they struggled. You kind of felt like those guys weren't there and they were off form, and South Africa could put them under pressure. And so, so I do think that's what it's going to be. You're not going to get lights out 190. That Evan Lewis game in game one is my biggest fear, is you arrive and you bowl your first ball and it goes out the park. Because that kind of just then says this West Indies team has arrived. And so essentially that's where South Africa is doing. You're working from a position of being an underdog and trying to stop the opposition's strengths, which is that top order batting, because the middle order hasn't come through. And also you want to expose the bowling as much as possible. You can't expose Obed McCoy, but maybe you can try to attack a Ravi Rampal or even an Akil Hussain. So that's where it is. That's why I would play Hayden Walsh Jr. because you've got a lot of right-handers, right, tomorrow. And so I'd play the leg spinner because he turns the ball away. We saw with Zampa. They struggled to hit Zampa. Look, Glenn Maxwell was like, honestly, it was just the first time we actually saw a ball grip in a while. But to a certain extent, that's where I'm leaning towards tomorrow for tomorrow's game. Tim, what are your thoughts around the side? Would you make any changes? And where do you think the game's going to be won and lost?
No changes to the Proteas side for me. I would only make the batting order changes like I explained, with the idea that if we need quick runs, with Torres in at sort of 5, and if we really need quick runs, it's going to be won and lost with the ball, in my opinion. That's essentially where it's going to be. I think it's going to be. But I think as Nikhil was saying, Hussain is going to be key, and our spinners are going to be key. I think it's going to be between those guys.
Yeah, that's what Mzansi Comic Club says. Ravi says that. There's also a little bit of a comment around here around Klaasen. He says Klaasen should not be there in tomorrow's game. Would open with Reza and QDK and Timber out the order, down the order. Tim, where do you sit with this?
No. You know my feelings of Reza. Lovely guy, shouldn't be in the World Cup squad. No. There's absolutely no way that I would have Reza in tomorrow in any way, shape, or form. So we have a problem. We have a problem with strike rate, and his career strike rate is 120. No, I'm afraid not. If he was striking 150, no problem. But no, definitely not.
But with the lack of the 120s, 130s, we're not like the West Indies with like 150s and 160s on there. Here's a comment for you from the Cricket Connoisseur. Much better comment, Nikhil. Evan Lewis will go big tomorrow. West Indies 80 all out. Oh, come on, Aaron. But yes, Nikhil, thank you very much for joining us. All the best for tomorrow. I think both sides, it's literally, this is, it may not feel like last chance saloon because everyone says don't panic, but it actually is. This is effectively an eliminator of the World Cup because I don't see a team winning 3 games, qualifying for the semi-finals, especially when you've lost your first 2 and the teams who could be on 3 wins are the teams that beat you. So so all the best for tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. Yeah, it'll be a good game of cricket, and either way, I'll enjoy it, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Cool. Tim, any final words for tomorrow? What does South Africa need to do? We want the win. What needs to happen?
We want the win, bro. I don't really care how we win. I don't care. I want a Ben Stokes 2019 win. If we're going to win like that, that's fine.
Okay. Look, I think for me, the key, depending on how the pitch is, I wouldn't go with a third spinner. Aiden has to bowl a couple of overs, even though I'm worried and it's a risk. But I'd have to take that risk. And I was happy Timber was taking risk. Like in that game when he bowled Kagiso in the power play for the 3rd over. It was a risk. And he got the wicket. But obviously the consequence was Dwayne Pretorius at the end. And now Dwayne Pretorius has been attacked by South African fans. Like they expected him to take 8 runs in that final over. Like, honestly, guys. But I'm actually even hoping that if we could be clever and you lose the first 2 wickets, maybe even promote Dwayne up the order just to make it a little bit longer and just tell Dwayne to try and look for a lot more boundaries. That's something I'd like to see, some little bit of different thinking around there. Like even
that's very un-South African and very un-Boucher-like. Very. I would love it. I would love it. I don't see it happening.
Look, if they lose tomorrow, there is no, like literally after tomorrow, there is no tomorrow. It's either you continue in the tournament or you're just being an extra in this World Cup and helping other teams qualify rather than you forcing your thing. So effectively, yes, the World Cup's been taken out of our hands by losing to Australia, which you shouldn't have done, because now you rely on help from other people. But if you win the next 4 games, there's no doubt that you're going to make it in. And that's the confidence the West Indies, because the West Indies are in a better position than us, Tim. They've already gone past the strongest team in the group. They've lost to them, but then they can win the next 4 and then they're in. We still have to play. Australia still have to play the England, and that makes it even harder to progress in the tournament. West Indies now know 4 wins is enough. And if it starts tomorrow, it means that South Africa go home. So I don't see us going past there if we lose to the West Indies, and effectively becomes a quarterfinal, a pseudo quarterfinal against Australia for the other 2, unless if somehow Sri Lanka and Bangladesh want to live up to form. One last thing from me to ask you: which player do you want to come through for you tomorrow?
Henrik Klaassen, go on. Henrik Klaassen to silence everybody.
Silence Henrik Klaassen. Batting at 5 or 6?
Well, because of what I've just said, batting at 6, getting a match-winning 30 of 12 balls, chasing the win, and maybe getting a couple of stumpings. No, he won't be keeping. Getting a couple of catches as well.
Okay. Cool. For me, it's all about Temba Bavuma. We saw what Baba could do. We saw what Mohammad Rizwan could do. I think he can do it too. And that's when I looked at it yesterday. I was like, this can be done. And going with the whole silencing of the haters, he must continue from that. From that, those 2 fours, those beautiful fours that he took off in the first over. It's going to be really important from him tomorrow. Last comment from Zanti Comic Club says, Tim, you must stay off the Milo. Klaassen is doing squat tomorrow. But yeah, that's what we are, the Full Quota Podcast. We take everybody's opinions. Temba, if you win the toss tomorrow, I know you watch us. You watch us because you and I we're nearly boys. One day we'll be boys. If you win the toss tomorrow, put them into bat. Put them under pressure. Remind them of what happened against England, and then take them, like literally, you start with KG, you continue with Anna, and you just go guns blazing at them, because you know if you break them apart at the top, it should be plain sailing tomorrow. But thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much to Nikhil. Thank you very much to everybody who in the YouTube comments have come through. That's your World Cup T20 preview. Enjoy it. Have a great time. We'll see you tomorrow again, and we'll figure it out. We'll see you when we next produce a podcast.
We'll next see you.
They're coming in thick and fast. But we're live on One World Sports Radio tomorrow, so please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you'll get us talking about that West Indies game and seeing whether South Africa finally get their World Cup campaign on the go, or if they'll be coming home sooner than expected. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy, and goodbye, good night, and finally, lesale kakafiso.